On this episode of Sustainable Horizons,
$1,200 homeowners can get back by upgrading the insulation in their home.
They claimed that it would destroy American jobs in the oil and gas industry, and many regions of the U.S. being solely dependent on this work would be desolate.
We're like 5 times higher than a lot of these individuals in these other countries. And for the people that kind of fight back and talk about their emissions, they don't have the technology yet. Like, they're still developing. Guess what?
What?
We're back.
Sweet. And today we're talking the election.
Dun, dun, dun.
If you're not already sick about hearing about elections and presidential campaigns and all that, here's some more for you. You know, this is a sustainability podcast, so we're just going to take a look at how elections and political cycles affect sustainability and the industry as a whole, the sustainability industry as a whole. So I just wanted to hit on a couple points that are major political talking points and just provide more information and more context on what they actually are and what they actually mean and some of the things that each side will say about them. So the first one, and this one has been around for a while, are the Paris Climate Accords. This goes all the way back to the Obama administration. So what actually are they? So this was an agreement amongst just about every single country except for 2. And they set long-term goals to guide all nations to substantially reduce global greenhouse gas emissions, to hold global temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius above those pre-industrial levels, which we talked about in a recent episode, and pursue efforts to limit to 1.5 degrees above those levels, which, again, the episode that we recently put out, we're not really doing too great on that. Also, what they do is they periodically assess the collective progress towards achieving the purpose of this agreement and its long-term goals, and they provide financing to developing countries to help mitigate these. So, periodically assessing the collective progress, each country has to submit a report every 5 years about what they're doing and what their progress is. Problem with this is that there's no teeth to these agreements. They say it's binding, but it's not. Like, there is no regulatory, there are no fines, there's nothing that will punish the country for not achieving their goals.
There's no consequences. Yeah.
And this has been incredibly controversial in the US. Why is that? Well, for Republicans, a lot of it was, and if you remember back in the Trump days, early on in his presidency, he took us out of the Paris Climate Accords. So why would he do that? There's no teeth to it. Why would we do that? The reason is that they claimed that it would destroy American jobs in the oil and gas industry, and many regions of the U.S. being solely dependent on this work would be desolate. They would completely lose all their source of income. And I mean, that is a valid claim. I do understand that, and I have empathy towards the individual people who live in those regions and rely off of the oil and gas industry for their family and their livelihood. I get it. Another argument is that they claim that it puts the U.S. at a disadvantage to other countries, primarily citing that other countries are not following their commitments, so therefore we shouldn't follow ours. Also, for context, China has the largest carbon footprint, and we are a close second, and then everyone else is falling somewhere below there. India is rapidly rising up those ranks, and they'll often point to these poor countries with lower technology mitigation efforts and be like, see, well, they're not doing this, so why should we be doing all that we're doing? Well, guess what? The amount of people that we have here in this country, with the amount of things that we do and the amount of access that we live off of here, it far outweighs all these poor nations. So I think that one's a little dumb.
That's why a lot of times you'll see people break it down to per capita.
Yes.
So when we talk about carbon footprints, like the carbon footprint of an American versus a Chinese person or somebody from India or some of these more developing nations, it's just drastically different. We're like insanely, like 5 times higher than a lot of these individuals in these other countries, even though they might be using dirtier fuel or, have these technologies that are a little further behind than what we're currently at. And for the people that kind of fight back and say, pointing to all these developing countries that talk about their emissions and how they're still doing the dirty stuff, they don't have the technology yet. They're still developing. They haven't gone through the phase that we went through in the 1900s to get up to where we are today. And so we're trying to fast track them, which is why a lot of investments in mitigation practices in third world development needs to go in place so that they can skip the fossil fuel age and jump right into the clean technology. And right now, clean technology is a little bit expensive, but it's coming down in price. And as soon as we can make it cheaper than the alternative, then we can just start implementing those into developing countries. But it's kind of wrong to say, they should stop developing completely, because we kind of talked about in one of our recent episodes as well, is like hedonistic sustainability is this topic of bringing a better life to everybody through sustainability. And so it's, again, you can't just say, hey, you got to cut off using fossil fuel and you got to stop developing as a country because it's hurting the environment. It's like, how can we help them develop in a sustainable way so that they can get all of these things that they need to kind of raise their standard of living to what most first world countries live at?
Yeah, it's just the arrogance of, hey, we already destroyed the planet by doing all these things that you are now doing, so you can't do that. It's just, that always makes me angry. But anyways, the last point that I wanted to make with the Paris Climate Accord is the reason the Republican Party argues against it is the Obama administration back in the day created a $3 billion green climate fund that helps fund a lot of scientific research. This was a policy that the Trump administration deemed wasteful spending. So they rolled that back to making it almost obsolete. And unfortunately, these are very dependent on the current political climate that is in charge.
Especially as we come to probably another Trump and Biden ballot in November. That pulls me into looking at the past change over we'll go from Obama to Trump to Biden. And we'll look at how these three sides, we went from a Democrat to a Republican to a Democrat again, and how in 12 years we've seen such a drastic change. So you talked about Obama's $3 billion towards research. It's huge. Government funding is kind of the only thing that allows sustainability research to kind of become a thing. We're starting to get more private investors involved in that type of stuff and private equity kind of doing that. But predominantly, but especially back in the Obama era, it did need a lot of subsidy from government. So that was great to see.
Oh, it still does. Pretty much every project I have to do has to, basically, you have to find a grant to fund it because businesses refuse to purchase this technology on their own.
And the government subsidizes a lot of oil, and subsidies just matter for a lot of industries to make sure that they thrive and survive. So we had Obama and his kind of revolutionary at the time, the $3 billion investment, because we just hadn't had that much contribution towards a sustainability effort or climate mitigation. Trump gets elected 2020 and comes in and just upsets the whole thing. He basically rolls back more than 100 environmental rules in his 4 years. And I'll leave a link to a New York Times article that dives into all the ones that he rolled back in his 4-year presidency in the description. But this is a huge 2 steps backwards. If we're talking 1 step forward, 2 steps back, we're going, call it 100 steps backwards, because now we have to fight to make all of these changes back to get to this baseline we were at. So he did that in 4 years and a lot of damage. Then comes Biden's presidency, and he kind of ran on the climate change and student debt platforms a lot. And so I know in his first 6 months as presidency, he enacted a lot of the executive orders. So he implemented a lot of executive orders, especially some of the environmental ones to stop pipelines or mines in precious areas. And I'm pretty sure one was put in place for the mines in Minnesota under an executive order to protect our wildlife up here and at least pause it for a little bit to let the court system kind of catch back up. So he came in, he did a lot of damage. People were like, cool, he's acting on what he ran on. And then it kind of just went stagnant for a while because that's how government works. You can kind of only do so many executive orders. He did way more than any other president had done, I believe, in the last 50 years. So people were kind of like, whoa, he's really utilizing his power and getting to the point where a lot of people were thinking he was kind of abusing it. And so he had to roll back on that. But then we see the Inflation Reduction Act come through, and it has huge milestones for climate mitigation actions and investments and clean energy. And just across the board, we're seeing Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, all of these funds getting the investments they need, or these organizations getting the investments they need to actually start working on some of these projects. And now as we come to November, and we still don't know what that ballot is going to look like if Trump is on there, one of his things that he's currently running on is the threatening to roll back much of what the IRA investments have promised in this act. And so you see basically, especially as we change political parties, a tug-of-war game between both sides, especially when it comes to environmental policies, because that's where a lot of our extremism, I think, in this country stands. And it has some weight, and it's a very emotional topic because when you talk about jobs being lost, we have to talk about jobs being lost and the ones being made. And how can we transition these workers and not let them feel left behind into these clean energy industries instead? Like, you're still valuable. You understand how energy is made, how the system works, and all that kind of stuff. So let's train them on this instead and have these companies roll that over that way. So there's things that need to be thought about, but we're already seeing another tug of war in the other direction after we had this huge milestone go in the right direction towards sustainability. And so we'll see kind of how it all plays out.
And I'm glad you brought up the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, because that bill was actually kind of a long time coming, because you may have heard of the Green New Deal. I feel like that's been a term that's been thrown around a lot in the last 5 years or so. So it was originally introduced by Senator Edward J. Markey and more famously Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, my queen, back in February 2019. As the name suggests, it was kind of modeled after FDR's New Deal back in the Great Depression era to help get America back to, get some more economic stimulation by upgrading infrastructure, healthcare, everything possible.
Just injecting cash into our economy.
Exactly. I wish our government wanted to do that again today. Anyways, so it was modeled as a sort of 10-year plan for tackling climate change and its relevant impact categories such as carbon reduction, infrastructure again, human health, because environmental health is human health, and a handful of other different projects. Although the Green New Deal, it was more of a movement than like a law, because I feel like there's been kind of like a lot of fear where the Green New Deal has become like a dirty word for communism in the US. And it's like, no. It's really not that, because what the Green New Deal actually was, it was just a House resolution that really just says that with every bill introduced, we have to have conversations about decarbonization and global warming. It doesn't even have to include stuff that actively helps those things. You just have to talk about it. It helps a little bit, but it's really not as terrifying as some people really thought it was.
It's just bringing awareness to that level of like, okay, we're going to push through this big oil and gas pipeline. Cool, let's talk about what that means, for the environment and climate reduction and carbon reduction and all that stuff.
And that really led to the Inflation Reduction Act, which was enacted August 16th, 2022, is when President Biden signed it into effect. And I just got a couple numbers here that just like really show how much money has been injected into this. So since it's enacted, the private sector has announced more than $110 billion in new clean energy manufacturing investments, including more than $70 billion in electric vehicles and the electric vehicle supply chain, and more than $10 billion in solar manufacturing. And since Biden was elected, the private sector has announced approximately $240 billion in new clean energy manufacturing investments. And investments in clean energy and climate since the IRA was signed into law have created more than 170,000 jobs, and it is projected to create more than 1.5 million additional jobs over the next decade. To keep writing down the list, American families are projected to save between $27 and $38 billion on their electricity bills from 2022 to 2030 relative to a scenario without the IRA.
That's insane.
And the Department of Energy, the DOE, has estimated that the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law will lead to greenhouse gas emission reductions of approximately 1 billion tons in 2030. The last one that I have is U.S. electricity generation from wind is expected to triple, and solar generation is expected to increase 7 to 8-fold by 2030, according to the DOE. So it's doing a lot. And there's also parts of this that you as an individual can get money for. So like if you buy an electric vehicle or install electric infrastructure such as batteries or solar panels, there's money out there to help fund that. So it's not just for businesses, it's for you as an individual too. It's been a sweeping act that is going to help a lot of people and get us going pretty far, because I used to be kind of against going into policy because I just learned about too many examples of policy creating unintended consequences that were arguably worse than the previous scenario. And so I was always cautious about it. But the more work I do and the more I get into this field, the more I realize that, governments creating these funding sources is where the work gets done, is when you create money for more electrification infrastructure, for pollution prevention work, for waste reduction work, for cleaning water, for all these different types of environmental categories. That is where people are allowed to do the most.
Well, and it's such an important reason why voting matters so much in this country, because that's how your voice can be heard the most, because we talk about supply and demand in a consumerism way, and you can buy less and then the demand is less and you can help in that way. But for your water to maintain clean, it's not like you can stop drinking it unless you're forced to, because it's now contaminated, like Flint, Michigan. There are so many things that need a systematic change, and that systematic change comes from laws, because it's often laws or money as a barrier that inhibits people or companies or facilities from changing to something a little bit greener. And so, you start breaking down those barriers and you make it a law that you now have to have, like the car industry forever has had to increase the efficiencies of their cars. That you have to have better gas mileage in every new car you put out, and every year they raise that standard, and every year you have to improve the technology. And it's kind of saying the same thing, but across the board for climate change efforts. So one of these things, the Inflation Reduction Act, really helps, especially for my insulation company that I help run, is the $1,200 homeowners can get back by upgrading the insulation in their home. Like, it's not a huge project to begin with, and then the government's going to give you $1,200 of it back in a tax credit. But by filing that, you got your stuff upgraded, and that's a huge part in the reduction of using less energy for heating and cooling costs. And the government's helping that. And then the next year, you can get new windows. And as long as they're Energy Star and triple pane, okay, you get another $1,200 towards that investment. And you start to add in local and organizational subsidies. So like Xcel and Centerpoint, who are our electricity and gas providers here in Minnesota, provide huge discounts for people that upgrade their insulation or get new windows and things like that. They just need energy efficiency.
Get new air conditioners.
Yeah, if you go to a heat pump, they give you an insane amount too, because it's just a more efficient way of pulling both heat and cool air out of the atmosphere and putting it into your home. And so every year these updates are available. Don't do it all at once, because it doesn't make sense. You're not getting the most tax credit and the most subsidy out of it. But take a project on a year and get the most out of it. I mean, Centerpoint, for its insulation is insane. The amount of subsidy it gets, because it's the one point where we can really reduce everything and help everything go better. You get $1,200 from the government. Centerpoint gives out $1,800. I think Xcel is $1,600. I mean, these costs are insane for a job that costs maybe $5 or $6 to do. You can quite literally get 50 or 60% of your money back. So subsidies matter, and they happen to trickle down to the consumer level too. So like you said, it's not just big businesses that are getting these to throw up, 50,000 solar panels on their manufacturing facility.
Yeah.
That definitely helps, and it matters, but you can see that money trickle all the way down, which is good. Good to see.
The one-time trickle down actually is effective. So, I mean, I guess it's no secret who Taylor and I will be voting for and hoping gets elected to keep all this legislation in effect.
Well, you never know. I might go independent.
Okay, well, I guess I shouldn't speak for you. No secret who I'm going to vote for. I guess we'll kind of cap it as this amount of election speak, but I guess we'll know on Tuesday, November 5th, 2024 is election day. So we're shouting out early to go out and vote.
Yeah. Go get registered right now.
Get registered now.
That's one step to make it less friction on the day of. I need to re-register where I moved to.
Good point.
And so that's on my to-do list before November because I don't want to wait in line and then go, oh, now you need to register. Here's another 30 minutes to do that. Like, it's not fun. So make it easy on yourself. Go register to vote and then make polling day super easy.
Oh, yeah. All right. Until next time.
Until next time. Bye.